They say your family tree is only as strong as the roots. Good evening, fellow Toastmasters. Welcome, guests. Tonight, I'm going to share with you a story that I uncovered in my family roots. And I'll challenge you to maybe look into your family history to see what lessons can be learned. Now, this story was uncovered on Ancestry.com. Has anyone got a family tree on there or know of the website? Oh, one person, good. So this was work that my sister had done on Ancestry.com. Suddenly, we unearthed this family history that none of us knew about. Now, the story begins in 1901. And there is an English lass by the name of Harriet. And Harriet has fallen head over heels with a man named Paul. Harriet is from England. Paul is from Germany. They fall madly and deeply in love and marry and take up residence in a little town in the English countryside called Buxton, England. And in that town, they create a business, a bakery. I can just imagine opening the door to the bakery. The aroma of freshly baked bread. Look at that case filled with delectable goodies. I can imagine the bakery being bustling with people from all over the community. And this family business thrives. What else thrives? The family. Harriet and Paul have 6 children. The oldest is my grandmother, Hermina Agnes. And so life is great in Buxton. The family is doing well. The business is doing well. And then world history intersects with my family history. World War I is declared. And suddenly, Germany and England are on opposite sides of the conflict. Now you would think a family that had grown in the community and was part of the community would be welcomed, even when there's conflict. Sadly, this did not happen. The children of Harriet and Paul had German names, and suddenly they were being teased and ostracized at school for their German heritage. The baker, who had always been known as Paul, was now suddenly the German baker. We're not supporting Germans in this conflict. And so the family business starts to erode. Now, my great-grandfather, Paul, is desperate. He races down to City Hall and declares an oath to Queen and country, claiming that he is for the English side. It has no effect. The bakery is vandalized on numerous occasions. And soon, Paul, Harriet, and 6 children are out on the street with no home and no business. Now, this is taking place in 1916. There is no social safety net for people who find themselves in these dire straits. And so, Paul and Harriet turn to the only recourse they have, which is a parish workhouse. Now, thankfully, these do not exist in our era. For those that have familiarity with them, I'm going to explain a little bit more just so that everyone in the audience understands. For a parish workhouse, when you checked into that facility, you gave up your clothes and they provided you with a uniform. You worked 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, so you could have food and board. The thing that struck me the most was that there were separate wings. So women in one section of the building, children, another section of the building, and men were in another section. Now we have records of Harriet and Paul and the 3 youngest children checking in to the workhouse. There's no documentation on what happened to my grandmother and the 2 older siblings, so we don't know yet what they were doing at this time. We do have records that Paul was desolate, depressed, and got into such a state he becomes catatonic. They soon checked Paul into an insane asylum, which is what they're called back in those days. Paul stays in that insane asylum for 1 week and dies at the age of 42. Now this is where the story takes a remarkable turn. For Harriet has the endurance to check out of that workhouse. She takes herself, the 3 children, and reunites with the other children and begins to make a life for herself. When I heard this, I was amazed and inspired, because in those days, for a single woman to be attempting to raise 6 children on her own, it's amazing to me. Now Harriet finds love again and meets a Canadian by the name of George Lowe. George and Harriet marry. And now it's George's turn to do something remarkable. He adopts all 6 children as his own. And they make passage to Canada. They come over in 2 waves. George, Harriet, and the 3 youngest kids, and then my grandmother and her 2 siblings come over a few months later. My mom asked my grandmother what that experience was like to be on the ocean liner as a 17-year-old teenager by herself with 2 other teenagers. And she said, at the time it didn't seem like that big a deal. But once she had children, she realized it was a big deal. And again, I'm amazed at the resilience of my family to risk all that to come across the ocean. The children here do not take the German names. They all use their Anglo names when they come to Canada, and I think that was because of the teasing and the taunting that they got when they were over in England during that terrible time. But what I took from this story was, I was just amazed that my family history had this much endurance, that my grandmother would not just sit and idly waste away in a workhouse. She grabbed the bull by the horns and took off in the face of great odds. And so I ask you tonight, what family history do you have? Have you talked to the elders? Have you gone on Ancestry.com? If you haven't, what stories are there just lying below the roots that might give you inspiration and you a newfound appreciation for where your family has been? Because if you don't know where you've been, how do you know where you're going? Madame Toastmaster.